Hi everyone. So I'm sure you have seen some YouTube videos that claim they can teach you YAML in about 5, 10 minutes or 15 minutes. Don't watch that. It's going to be just an introduction, scratch the surface, and you will not learn anything. In this video, which is about 1.5 hours, I'm going to have you master what YAML is. Why do we need it? How do we write files? Where it is used and why it is beneficial to learn it. So let's rock and roll. To understand the need for YAML and similar data serialization languages, let's look at the example that we see. Let's say that we have a web application that has a front end that is written, or the user interface written in JavaScript using the React library, and the back end of that application is written in Python using the Django framework. Each one of these programming languages stores data and interprets data in a different way. However, they need to communicate for the application to work successfully. Then, should the JavaScript side submit to the syntax of the Python? Or should the Python use the syntax of the JavaScript? Or should each one of them have a built-in module that is going to translate the other one? Or do we need to look for a common language or a common format that they can use to exchange data, or basically to talk to one another? So what do we do? What's the resolution? What's the decision on that? And this is where we need the serialization or the data serialization language. And the most famous ones are three. This is XML, JSON, and YAML. A fun fact, there are so many programming languages out there today, but only a handful of languages for storing and transferring data, or data serialization languages. However, applications written in different languages, in different formats, they need a standard agreed to language or syntax in order to communicate and transfer data among them. And that's again why this is important, YAML, JSON, and XML. So what are these stand for, or what do they stand for? XML stands for Extensible Markup Language, and probably this is the oldest one of the three. Then we have the JavaScript Object Notation, or the JSON. And then we have YAML, which stands for YAML Ain't Markup Language, which is funny. And these are the three commonly used ones. YAML and JSON are the most commonly used ones nowadays. So using a data serialization language, the two components of the application that we discussed, the front end and the back end, they can communicate. So if we pick up JSON, for example, in this case, there has to be a module, there has to be somehow a translator that will take the JavaScript syntax and then will reformat it into a JSON message before that is being sent to the other side. Also, when we are writing from the Python side, there has to be a component that is going to translate the Python syntax into JSON, which is understood by the other side. So as if we have two JSON engines here that they can translate back and forth, and that's how we have a successful communication. So what is the protocol or the format that we are using, or the language between the two? This is going to be, in our case, JSON. Now, which one to learn? Let's find out looking at an example to represent the same exact set of data about a server with the name app1. The server is manufactured by HP, Hewlett-Packard. And then we have the tier where it is deployed, which is in the backend. So this is going to be the XML representation. This is going to be the JSON representation, and here is the YAML representation. Please have a look for a second on each one of them and find out, or try to come up with, which do you think is the easiest one to use. And that's why we believe it is YAML. If we take a look, the square brackets and the angled brackets are very important when we are dealing with JSON. These are very important ones to use. And here, as you can see, the syntax is much more. It's more like an HTML file. And then we have the easiest of them, which only uses line separation and indentation to represent the data. So there is nothing tricky there. And this is why YAML is the most, or the favorite, data serialization language out there today. A bit of history about YAML. There are different numbers, but it started in the early 2000s. And then in 2006 was a remarkable year for YAML, where the libyaml library was produced, using which a lot of YAML frameworks in several programming languages were built. Both YAML and JSON are faster than XML, and that's why they are more favored when it comes to speed and communication between languages. This is enough for us to be curious to learn YAML, aside from the fact we will definitely need it to understand these tools and technologies that are becoming very hot nowadays. YAML is a digestible, human-readable serialization language that is used to create configuration files, and it is supported today by the most popular programming languages and most tech and DevOps tools. It is designed to be human-friendly, to be very easy for the human to understand and read and write. And also it is widely used in this set in public clouds today, in DevOps in public clouds, and also in configuration tools, and that include, but is not limited to, Ansible, Docker, Kubernetes, Prometheus, Chef, and Puppet, and a lot more. So why did we come up with this course? There's a lot of free videos on YouTube and other places where they will explain in 5 minutes or in 10 minutes what is YAML. We have gone through most of these popular videos and we found a very common problem. They all focus on giving you some YAML examples, how to write some examples, and that's it. But there is no understanding about why is it written that way. What are the different data structures in YAML, how they should be written, how they could be nested, and also some advanced YAML concepts. And this is where this course was most needed, and that's how we came up with this course. Remember that to deal with these hot DevOps tool technologies and cloud DevOps in general, you will need to be able to write and understand YAML files very well. Hence, the reason behind this course content and flow design. Where do we use YAML? What are the use cases, typical ones? So we can use YAML for configuration files. We can also use it for log files or for inter-process messaging between different application components, for cross-language data sharing, as the example we have seen between JavaScript and Python, for object persistence, storing objects as well, and debugging of complex data structures. So these are all typical use cases for YAML today. And when it comes to configuration files, we need to think about Helm, we need to think about Docker, Kubernetes, Chef, Puppet, Ansible, and so on. So how does a YAML file look? What kind of characters can we use to write it? And this is the simple Unicode printable characters that we are all used to. Some of these characters will provide structural information, and the rest is the data itself that we need to represent. In general, YAML minimizes the amount of structural characters, which makes the data easily readable. So we don't have a lot of squared brackets or the different signs that are used in HTML and characters and all that for structure. So we don't have to do that. So let's look at an example. Here is one example. So here we have an object or an item, if you will. We are going to look at what this is exactly called in YAML later on, a person that has some details that we need to represent. And here we have a comment, and then we have the name, the age, the gender, the height, and as you can see, we are using here normal alphanumerics, and then we are using integers, and we are using floats or decimals, and we are using Boolean as well, true and false, and we are using date. Okay, so we can represent details about an object by listing the details under the object in a specific format that we are going to look at. And this is a typical example of a YAML file. Now, what are the data structures? How can I write the data? The three primitive or basic data structures used heavily in YAML are the scalars, as we have seen now, strings, numbers. Numbers could be integers or floats or decimals. It could be Boolean. It could be date, as we have seen. Also, we use mappings, or they are called the hashes or dictionaries. You don't need to worry about what these are right now. We are going to look at that in a separate lecture. And then we have sequences. When you have data where the order is important, and it's also called arrays or lists. To form a complete data serialization language for any native data structure, YAML leverages the above three structures and adds a simple typing system, and that's the user-friendly nature of YAML, and then an aliasing mechanism that also we are going to decipher and look at examples for. In YAML, we can use comments. So basically, we can put sentences that we are going to tell YAML, don't process it. This is only for myself, the developer or the system administrator or the DevOps engineer. I'm just adding some comments. For me, when I open the file, I will remember what was that about. Okay, and here's an example of that. So when you put the hash or the pound sign to the left and then you write some text, JSON will not try to interpret that. It will just treat it as a comment, and that is not important to be processed as part of the data you are trying to represent. And it can be in a separate file, as you can see, or it can be after the data that you want to represent. You just put the hash and then you put the data that you want. So this is valid and this is valid, and both of them, YAML is not going to bother about trying to interpret what they are. It's simply a comment. If you want to represent data in YAML, this is sometimes called a document stream. Okay, and it could be a single document stream or multiple document streams. So you can represent more than one object in the same document. What signifies or marks the beginning of a document? That is going to be the 3 dashes that you see at the beginning. Hyphens or dashes, whatever you want to call it. Okay, so these are the signal that this is a start of a document. And then the 3 dots, they could indicate the end of a document. And we can have more than one document in a stream. So I can represent more than one object, if you will, in one stream or document stream. And depending on which tool you are dealing with, the 3 dashes or the marking the beginning of the document may or may not be required. So if you are dealing with a single document stream, then some tools will not need the start and an end of your document. There are some online tools that you want to use in order to find out if you are doing any mistakes, if the YAML script that you have written is a valid one, or if you have some errors. Also, there are tools that will help you view the result of your YAML file. So let's look at these two. The first one we need to introduce is the online validation tool. There are so many of them on the internet, and here's one of them, the online YAMLtools.com/validate-YAML. So let's have a look at this one online. So here's an example of a YAML script, a longer one. You don't need to worry about what it means right now. And when you paste that or you load it here, then you are going to see whether there are some errors in your code or not. This is only about whether your YAML formatting is correct or is wrong. So for example, let me do this. As I start playing with the document, and I'm now purposely doing a mistake in YAML, and you will understand why this is a mistake. Later on, you can find out the details of this. But what I'm trying to say is, if your code has YAML formatting errors, it's going to be highlighted. See? And if I do this, again, it's an error. You don't need to decipher why the error is, but you need to agree with me that this tool is helpful to find whether your script is right or wrong. Okay? That's the first one that we need to look at. The second one we need to look at is the jsonformatter.org, the YAML viewer. And what would this one do? This is basically when you paste your code right here, and we're going to use it later on, and you click on YAML viewer, it will show you what the output, how this is going to be understood, how this is going to be interpreted. And here's an example that I have pasted a little code here that shows a start of a document, and then a student with this name, the grade, where this guy is, and the age, just any trivial data. And when you click on YAML viewer, it shows you how this is going to be understood on the other side, on the receiver side, or what will be the output basically of the data you're trying to represent, how the data is going to be represented. So these are two tools that we are going to use heavily as we go through the course in order to find out if you have any errors in the syntax that we have, and also if we need to find out what would the output be represented as or how it would look like. Let's look at the first and the most primitive data structure, which is used when we need to represent integers, floats, and strings, which is the key value pairs. Data in YAML is represented as key value pairs. And we can set the value directly to the key or through sequences, also called lists, arrays, or mappings. And we are going to look at the lists and mappings later on. So let's look now at a very simple YAML data item where we need to represent a key, which is person, and then assign to that a value of Alice John. If we look at the anatomy of this, so the person is on the left-hand side, which is the key. And then we have a mandatory colon right after the key without any spaces. And then right after the colon, we have a space. This is mandatory to have. And then we have the value assigned to that key. So that's how you write it. The key, and then immediately followed by a colon, a space, and then the value that you want to assign. And this value, as we mentioned, it can be an integer, it can be a string. This is a string format. It can be a float. It can be in many ways. If the key has more than one word, then YAML would allow us to have them separate. So there are spaces in between. There could be a dash or a hyphen in between, or an underscore. Of course, the most common one in the DevOps domain is the underscore one. So please remember that the colon must be followed by a space, and there is no space before the colon, but there is one space to the right from the colon before you start to assign the value. Now, what are the possible values for a key? Could be a string, as the one we have seen. It could be an integer. It could be a float or a decimal point number. It could be a boolean, like true, false, on, off, yes, no. All of these are going to be translated the same. It could be a date. This is the format to write the date. 4 digits for the year, hyphen 2 digits for the month, hyphen 2 digits for the day. And then if you want to add the time, then it's going to be hours, minutes, seconds. Or it could be a null. And if we look at these examples, all of these are valid YAML key value pairs. So the key could be a string surrounded by quotes. And the value for that could be also a string surrounded by quotes. It could be single quotes or double quotes. But the space, the colon, and the space to the right are mandatory in any one of these examples. The key could be a number, in this case, 23rd, represented by a number, and then it's going to be assigned a string. Could be string assigned a Boolean value. It could be a key with multiple words and spaces assigned a number, or it could be a null value and null. So it could be a string and then the value is null. So all of these are valid representation of key values in YAML. Now, how about the string? You will see it in different files that there are without quotes that are written. The string value of a key, it could be without quotes, it could be with double quotes, or with single quotes. The general rule is all of them are acceptable, and there is an exception if you are using special characters like a colon within your string, or the square brackets, the straight brackets, the ampersand, asterisk, the hash, the question mark, and so on, this list. Then it's better to surround your string that contains these characters with single or double quotes. And here's an example. If we have a line feed, then it's better to surround it. It could be accepted in some tools, but it might not be with others. If you want to represent a URL, for example, the key is web page, colon, and then I need to paste the URL of that one, or a web address, basically. Then one representation could be that you can surround it with single quotes. In some tools, if you don't surround it with the quotes, also it will be acceptable. Still with YAML data structures, and we're going to look at dictionaries, mappings, or hashes. If you hear any one of these in the YAML domain, that are exactly the same things. Here is an example where we have set all the key values that we have looked at an earlier example to represent one person. So that person now has a name, has an age, a gender, height, and favorite color, employed or not, and birth date. So all of these are attributes or features or data items for the same person. Okay. Now, the way we are representing that right now is a set of key value pairs. They are indented equally to the right under an object name followed by colon. So this is called a dictionary or a mapping or a hash. So you're basically mapping a set of attributes. They could be only scalars, they could be only strings, and they could be a list of key value pairs that are assigned or are details about that object. And this is now called a dictionary, a mapping, or a hash. So this is the key or the object. So now the main key is not assigned a value directly, but the values assigned are actually key value pairs. So this is what represents a mapping. And these are the mappings of the key or the object. So instead of assigning one direct attribute here to become the value, all of this is perceived as the value of that object. Please note that we have two spaces indentation here to signify the scope. So basically, now all of these are treated as siblings, okay? And all of them are children of the main object. That's why they are equally indented to the right under the object. So we can use dictionary hash and mappings to assign multiple values to a key, as we have seen here. And YAML uses indentation to define scope, and we have to begin each entry on its own line. So I cannot have two entries on the same line. And as we mentioned before, if these are all siblings and children of the object, then the indentation has to be equal for all of them. So this representation is correct. But if I do this, then this is not correct if gender, height, and favorite color are actually siblings of name, age, and employed and birth date. They have to be equally. And now we are defining a different scope. So this one and this one, they don't mean the same in the YAML definition or the YAML data structure to represent the same set of data. And that's why the left-hand side is okay, but the right-hand side, I have actually defined a different scope under age, and I cannot assign a value directly to a key and then have also values under that indented. So this is not possible, and we're going to elaborate on that a little bit more. However, the representation on the right does not equal the representation on the left. We can use the curly brackets to represent mappings, and that is because YAML is a superset of JSON. Anything represented in JSON is considered valid in YAML. So if you have this example, the person here is the object, and these are the key value pairs that are assigned as value for the object, or for the main key, if you will. Then this can be represented with curly brackets, exactly as we do in JSON, where the name is assigned a value, and then the gender is assigned a value, and then the age is assigned a value. All of them in one line, and they are surrounded or delimited by the curly brackets, and this is exactly like this one from a YAML perspective. All right, so that's it for the mappings, which are also the hashes or dictionaries in YAML, and how we can represent a key with multiple values that are not ordered. And the multiple values, they could be key value pairs. Now let's look at another YAML data structure, which is the lists, sequences, or arrays. So lists and arrays and sequences are all common names for this, depending on the tool or the technology you are dealing with. So what's a sequence or a list or an array? If you have a key and you want to assign multiple value to the key, but you want a specific order, so the listing or the sequence is very important within, then you need to use lists and not dictionaries. So we have the key here is students, and then we have a hyphen, and that designates an item in the list, and then a space to the right, and then the value. And then you have another hyphen, which means, and now this is a second item in the same list, and then a space, and then a name in this case, and then I have a third hyphen, which means this list has 3 items, and then I have the string that represents the third value. So we need to be careful about the hyphen or the dash. This is very important, followed by a space. And we also need to find out that to define the scope for students, we need to do indentation under students. And usually it's 2 spaces. And in this case, the list items are only strings, but they could be key values as well. They don't have to be strings all the time. Now let's look at this. If we write an item that is car parts, and then we need to assign 3 items in sequence for it, and these are tires, engine, and gas tank. If we do the indentation with 2 spaces to define the scope, or if we even write it right below without any indentation, both are going to be interpreted 100% the same, as long as the order within each is the same. As we mentioned earlier, here's an example of the same one that we just looked at for a list or a sequence or an array. And here, each one of the items is nothing more a scalar. So it's a string. It could be a number. It could be a string. It could be a Boolean. I mean, it's one thing that is not assigned value. It's not a key value pair. But there is nothing to stop you from representing data in a sequence, in an order that you want, if you wanted to have key values assigned to each item and not just a scalar object. We can use square brackets with arrays or with lists and sequences as well. So how would we do that? So if I want to represent this on one line as an array, I can do car parts, the same thing here. And then between square brackets, I'm going to double quote each one of these and separate them by a comma and a space. So tires, then comma, space to the right, engine, comma, space to the right, and then gas tank. if these were not strings and they were numbers, for example, car speeds, I can have floats, integers, and also they are going to be separated by a comma and a space and then surrounded by the square brackets. If I have different URLs I need to represent, nothing stops me from writing the key and then having the array defined as 2 square brackets, and within I have a single quoted URL, comma, space, single quotes URL. The sequence is very important within the arrays. So these 2 representations, which have the tires and engine order swapped, it's not the same. So this is acceptable YAML representation because it does have the indentation and there is no value to the right from the key. And then I assign the multiple values right here, but they are not the same when it comes to interpreting each one of them. The sequence here, this engine is the first, tires is second. Here, tires is the first and engine is the second. If this was a dictionary, they would have been the same, but in lists or sequences or arrays, they are not the same representation of data. Now, this is very important to understand. I can always, with the key value pairs, I can have a key and then immediately followed by a colon, 1 space to the right, and then a value for that key. So I can assign the value directly to the key. Or I can assign multiple values, 1 or more values, through a dictionary to the key or through a list to the key. And this is right, but they are different data structures. However, what I cannot do, and this is going to be wrong and refused by YAML validation tools, is if I assign person and I assign it a value, and then underneath I do scope and indentation, and then I start assigning other values for that. So either you have the values as list or a dictionary, or as a key value pair direct mapping, but you cannot mix and match. You cannot do that. Okay. How can we prove this? Let's go to the validation tool and we are going to use these and find out if it's accepted or not. Let's play a little bit with these in order to make sure that we understand what we are doing. So here is our YAML validation tool. Now let's get rid of this one and we're going to do simple ones. So let's say I'm going to say student and then I'm going to assign the value. So colon, space to the right, and then I'm going to say Muhammad Salah, for example. Okay. No objection whatsoever from this side. So I'm now doing a good thing. Now let's say if I go down and then I start indenting and then I'm going to write student 1 and then I'm going to assign something else. See, as soon as I started doing this, now it's objecting. And why is that? Bad indentation of a mapping entry at line 2. What is line 2? This is line 2. And now we are doing something wrong here. What if I went all the way to the back and I wanted to assign another key value here, John Smith, for example? It's not going to object that. But as soon as I'm going to take 1 space, then it's going to say, you are trying now. So this is how it sees it. You are trying to assign a key value pair to a key that already has a value. So it's either you do, like if I remove this, it's going to be correct again. Either you assign the value straight to the key, or you can remove it from here and we can do this. So I can indent now and I'm going to assign name and then the same thing. Now there is nothing wrong with this. But as soon as I write here John, then it complains again that I'm doing a wrong thing. Okay, so this is how you play with key values. Now, if I wanted to have name and then I'm going to write for this guy the age 5. So now that name is Muhammad Salah, the age is 5. Or I can say, for example, just to show the difference, student 1 and then student 2, John Smith. No complaints whatsoever, okay? Now, whether I do this or if I remove the order, I change the order, it's exactly the same. Why? Because this is a mapping. This is a dictionary or a hash where the order is not important, but you define the scope by doing the indentation underneath a key, and this would become key value pairs that are assigned as values to the key. So this is a dictionary right now. Now, if I want to convert it into a list, then I can do this, and I can do this, and it becomes a list. What if I remove the indentation completely and ignore the errors before we reach the steady state? So, I mean, this is our aim. So this is correct and the other one was correct. Now let's take it to the viewer and find out if this is exactly the same or not. So we are now with the viewer, and let's see how this is going to be interpreted. So if I click on YAML viewer, it's going to tell me that you have one object, which is student in our case, and it has two values, and the values are student1, Muhammad, and student2. So this is how this is interpreted, okay? Now, if I do this, and then I go here and I paste it, and if I can check, then it doesn't matter. I have also two students, but now only the order is different. Okay, is it the same? No, it's not the same from a list perspective. What if it was a dictionary and not a list? So in this case, I'm going to do this, and here it shows me that I have student 2 and student 1, John Smith and Muhammad Salah. But from a YAML perspective, if I swap this and I get this guy first, and then I take the second one and I do YAML viewer, again, it's the same thing. So the order is not important at all when we are dealing with dictionaries. It's very important when we are dealing with lists. And remember now, as soon as I start assigning anything here and I try to do YAML viewer, it's not going to change. Why? Because now you have an error and it's unable to interpret that. And that's why this did not change at all. But if I remove these two and I do a YAML viewer, it's going to understand it because that's a valid YAML representation and it's going to accept it here. Now let's look at what if I do single quote equals double quotes. So the key value pairs, now I'm trying to play with quotes and see if it will work or not. It's exactly the same. See, it did not change. It's exactly the same. What if I did in the next one, I'm going to say name, age equals, and then I'm going to do 3, 5. Is it acceptable? Let's see. So on the right side, it's saying that first one, name, has a value of 3, and the second one has a value of 5, and these are mapped to name and age, and these are now 2 values. So there, you can do this. There's nothing stops you from doing this. Now, how about the other representation that we talked about? If I have student, and then I'm going to assign a mapping using the curly brackets, and I'm going to say name, John Smith, then comma space, and then age, 5, and then I'm going to assign gender, male. Is this going to be accepted? Let's see. Oh, I need to change the student from the student. These are 2 variables because I used student before. So I cannot do, as we mentioned before, this is as if when I didn't have this, it was wrong. Why? Because it's seeing it as if I'm assigning student a direct value as a key value pair, and then I'm assigning it again as a mapping, which is wrong. And if we look at the validation, let's look at the validation tool because that will show us the mistake. So let me paste the same code here, and now it doesn't like it. Why? Because it's saying duplicated mapping key at line 3. So here you are mapping a set of value pairs to a key, whereas at the beginning you had it already assigned a string. So if I change either one of them, this is going to be valid. Okay, so these are the things we are talking about that you need to be familiar with when you are dealing with all YAML attributes and all that. So mappings, lists, and sequences are completely different ways of representing your data. When do you use it? It depends on the data you are trying to represent. Now, do I use a list or do I use a mapping? If I have a set of value pairs I want to assign to an object, in that case, I'm going to tell you what is the tool that you're going to use. Are you going to use Kubernetes? Are you going to use Ansible? Are you going to write that YAML file for Cloudformation? Please consult the documentation from these tools in order to tell you how this should be represented. They need to define whether this should be a list or it can be just a mapping. Okay, so this is very important. When you are writing these files on your own, then these are correct. I mean, this representation is right. And also if you wrote this as a list, it's going to be correct as well from a YAML perspective. But the tool you are going to submit that file to what is it expecting? Or the programming language you're going to submit that to. Is it expecting a list? So if it finds a dictionary, that becomes an error. So your code is not valid from the tool perspective, not from the YAML perspective. And the other way around, okay? So it's a YAML syntax and formatting, and also, in addition to that, it's what is the end tool that is going to use this code expecting you to write, a list, a mapping, or just a key value pair. And we're going to look at an example at the end of how Kubernetes defines the YAML format for every single service or object that you are trying to create with Kubernetes. So they dictate when to use a mapping, they dictate when to use a list, or when to use just a straight key value pair. So we have looked at YAML files, we have looked at how we can start a document, we have looked at how we can assign key value pairs, we have looked at how we can represent a key with multiple values, either using scalars without key value pairs, or they could be multiple key value pairs that I assign. Now, do I have to use these separately, or can I mix and match? Can I have mapping inside a list, or a list inside a mapping, or a list inside a list, or a mapping inside a mapping? All of these are valid structures as well. So let's take some examples. So let's look at a sequence of mappings. So I have multiple dictionaries, and I'm going to represent each of them as a list item. How can I do this? So I have a key that is player games. Okay, and now I have two players, John Suarez that played 10 games and Eduardo Lima that plays only 4 games. So how can I represent that? And it's important for me to have the one that has the higher number of games at the beginning of the list. So how can I do this? You can do player games and don't assign any values here after the colon. And then I'm going to have the first list item, which is going to be a dictionary. It's going to say name and then colon and then a space, John Suarez, the first player. In the next line, I'm not going to put any hyphens, so it's not a new list item. This is going to be games and the number of games that this player played. So I have a dictionary of 2 key value pairs that are now represented as one list item. And order is important when you're dealing with lists. The item of the list is a dictionary. Now I have another dictionary for the other player, and this is Eduardo Lima that played only 4 games, and also it is defined as a list item. Okay, so I have these 2 dictionaries inside a list, and each of them is representing a list item. I can have more key value pairs under each one of them. So for example, date of birth, the club he used to play for, as long as I don't have a hyphen to the left, that means it is still a key value pair that belongs to the same dictionary, which starts with this first key value pair. Okay, so that is one. The same one, I can write it if I put the hyphen and then I did a line feed and enter and then I start writing. This is exactly going to be interpreted the same like the other one. Let's find out and check if this is true. I'm going to head into the YAML validation tool. So here we go. And this is accepted, no errors at all there. And if I go here and I delete this and indent it properly and then put the hyphen, it becomes again a correct one. So I am mixing now. So there is a hyphen right to the left of the first item, or the first dictionary, if you will. And there is one that has an enter after which, and this is acceptable as well. And if I do this and I take this one out and I put it here, it's going to be exactly the same. So no problems at all in this case. Okay, so that is true, that this is exactly the same like the other one. Now, are these the same or not? Let's find out. So now, if I start changing within the dictionary, the order, it's exactly the same. Why? Because this is a dictionary that has name and games for John Suarez. And if I swap the items, but I still maintain it as the first item in the list, then it becomes exactly the same. And for the other player, whether I keep it the same or I change it, it doesn't matter, as long as this dictionary is within the item. Okay? But if I take this item and move it up, it becomes not wrong from a YAML perspective, but it doesn't equal the one to the left. All right? So changing within a dictionary, the order is not important. But changing the items of a list, it will yield another list that is not equal to the first one. Now I can have a list inside a list. So the same past example, if I put hyphens to the left, it becomes a list, right? And then I have injuries in this example is a key, a list item, but it's a key that I can assign multiple locations where this player had injuries. Okay, and I can represent that again as an array in square brackets. Okay, so this is exactly like this one, and it's going to be represented the same. How can I validate this? Let's take it to the YAML viewer and see if we are going to end up with the same thing. So here's our YAML viewer. Let's copy the example here. Okay, so here's the data. I copied the YAML configuration here, or the YAML data structure here, and I'm going to confirm how it looks like. So let's interpret how this is perceived on the other side. So I have one object, and that is a key that will be assigned a value. So that's a player games. And then we have the assignment as a list. And how can I confirm that? Here it is. This is square brackets. So that signifies a list of 3 items. 1, 2, 3. And then inside this list, what do I have? The first item is a key value pair, as it shows here. And here's the value of that, the key value pair. And the second item, the same thing. And the third item is shown as a key value pair again, but the pair or the values for the key is assigned as a list of 3 items. The key for the list is injuries, and then I have the values assigned are shin, shoulder, and knee. The order is very important here, as we know. Now, can I represent that in a different way? Of course you can. You can use, since this is a list, right? So I can use square brackets, and then I can have knee, shoulder, and shin. If I do this, is it going to be the same? Of course, if I leave it this way, it's wrong because I'm assigning here a list to the key, and then I have another list under the same key. It doesn't work like that. So I'm going to remove this. And if I do the YAML viewer, I don't anticipate any difference because it's exactly the same. So that's injuries, a list of 3 items, and here are they with the order that we have. All right. So the YAML viewer is always helpful in order to find out how this is going to be translated. And please remember that it can understand a list from a dictionary, from a key value, from a list within as a value for a key. This is all understood. And that's why the tools, they will dictate whether you need to insert that as a key value directly or as a list or as a dictionary. And that's why you need to consult the documentation of the tool you're going to use. All right, moving forward, another thing that we need to learn is that I can nest a dictionary within another dictionary. So let's find out if this is the case. Then a dictionary item can be a dictionary itself. So here we have a key for which we have assigned multiple key value pairs with no hyphens on the left. So this is a dictionary, okay? But then the third key, it doesn't have a direct assigned value. Rather, it has a dictionary of siblings, basically children of this, because of the indentation defines the scope. And each of them is a key value pair. So let's take it to our friend, the YAML viewer, and find out if this is true or not. And of course, I can represent the same thing, the dictionary, with the curly brackets as we see here. So this is going to be perceived exactly like this one from a YAML perspective. Okay, let's take it to our friend and find out how it looks like. Okay, so here's our friend, the YAML viewer, and I'm going to paste that in here and find out how it's going to be interpreted. So what do I expect? I expect a key, and here's the object. And then that object is going to have here, as you can see, a dictionary of 3 items as it shows by the curly brackets. And if I expand on that, then I have the first one, John Suarez, and the games played are 100. And then I have another dictionary of 3 items, which has a key of injury years. And if I scroll down, then I can find that I have the 3 items within. Okay. And that would have been the same if you assign that as a key value, key value, key value, as we have seen. All right, so mixed structures. So in this case, I can have a list that has here a dictionary of 2 items. So name, Prashant, and the age is 18. And then another list item where we have on each line a key value pair. And these 2 are a dictionary as well, but it is the second item in the list. And then I can have a list as a key, and then a list as a value. And this will be a list item as well. So let's take this and find out how this is going to be interpreted by YAML. So here we go. And I'm going to paste it here. And let's find out how this is translated. So here it tells me you have an array of 3 items. So this is perceived as an item. It's a dictionary, but it's perceived as an item. And then you have this, which is the third item. Okay, so what is the first one? Tell me about the first one, which is this guy right here. It's telling me it's a dictionary of 2 items. And if I expand it, it is absolutely right, because that's a curly brackets, that's a dictionary. And here is the first key value pair, and here's the second key value pair. Now, what's the second item? It's telling me again, it's a dictionary of 2 items, and it's properly done, name and Shiva. Now, within this, if I put age instead of name and name instead of age, it's going to be the same thing. It's a dictionary. Now, the third one I have, it tells me this is a key that has values. What is the key? So the key is name and age, okay? And then it has 2 values, and these are Niraj and the age 14. So I can assign a key as a list, and then I can have 2 values assigned to that key as a list. Okay, so this is exactly as if I wrote this way. Then here I'm going to do Niraj and 14. So let's expand it and see. The third one is what I care about. It's exactly the same. Okay. And we're going to look at some advanced features, or let me put it in a different way. Some features or some capabilities of YAML that you might not use every day, but they are there for you when you want to use them. So let's start with the multi-line strings. So what is this all about? What if I want, as we see on the left-hand side here, that I want to have a dictionary that has 2 items. The first one is going to be assigned a name, okay, as a key value pair. And then for the second one, I wanted to have a multi-line string, like this case. If I don't want to maintain the line feed or the enter or the 3 lines, and I want them to appear as 1 line, then after the colon, I leave a space and I put the greater than sign. Every new line feed is going to be treated as a space. So this is going to look like John was the president of, and then a couple of spaces, kids, World Bank from, and then a couple of spaces, and then the rest of it. Okay, how can we prove that? We're going to look at that at the YAML viewer. And then the same thing, what if I wanted to keep the formatting? So if I write it in multi-line, I want it to be understood as multi-line. So basically, I want backslash and then the letter N small, which is a line feed symbol in the code that is going to be translated as a line feed. So I'll have this processed and then an enter, a line feed, and then this processed and enter, and then this processed and an enter. Why would you need to have this? So let's say, for example, I wanted to have a bash script like this example here, and I want the bash script to be implemented as separate lines, not as a space, and then I have the second command and space and the third command and so on. I don't want it to be treated as a single sentence. I want it to be treated as multiple lines. What do? You use the magic of the pipe, or this bar right here. So in this case, in the previous statement, if I wanted to preserve it, then after the colon, instead of the greater than, I use the pipe symbol, and that will preserve the formatting. So let's go ahead to YAML viewer and verify that this is how it works. So here's our friend, the YAML viewer, and I'm going to paste this. And now I have the greater sign. So I would expect this to be understood as this phrase, and then a space or a couple of spaces, and then the next, and so on. So let's find out. So here the John Smith went fine. And this is a dictionary. How do I know? This is the curly brackets with 2. So that's a dictionary with 2 items. If the number was 1, so that's a key value pair. So let's look at the accomplishment. I have here 3 lines, but they will be read as John was the president of, couple of spaces, kids, World Bank from, couple of spaces, and so on. And then there is a line feed at the end. So this is all going to be 1 line. What if I remove this and I just add the pipe and I do a YAML viewer again? So now, as you can see, the first one off and then a line feed. So please use an enter here. Consider it a new line when you want to implement the second part and then the third part. And then I have the line feed at the end. Okay. Now, if we grab the text, the bash script that I showed you, let's grab it and copy it here and see how this is going to be interpreted. So this is a key that has a value, and the value is a list of 1 item. And the list has multi-line input, okay? And here I'm asking, please maintain the formatting. So treat each one of these as a separate line. And here it's going to tell me this is an object, a dictionary of 1 item, a key, which is bash. And that bash has a list of 1 item, okay? So the list then of 1 item has this multi-line string and is going to be treated as such. So I have here \n, which is a line feed, and then I have yum update -y, a line feed here, and then I have yum install httpd and then a line feed at the end, and systemctl start httpd service and a line feed, and then echo and this statement and a line feed at the end. Each one of these is going to be translated as a separate line, and that is what I wanted since I used the pipe right here. Okay, so please remember this, it's an important feature. So going back to our slides, let's look at what else do we need to know about YAML. Complex keys. Can I have a multi-line key, as we are showing right here, that has a colon value and then a value assigned? And the answer is yes, if you precede the key with the question mark. So let's grab that and look at how it's going to look like. So if we look at the example on the right-hand side, this is a 2-line key, which is hyphen first place and hyphen second place. And this is going to be assigned a list as a value, and the list has 2 different items. All right, so let's copy and paste our text here and find out how it's going to be treated in YAML viewer. Here is what I have, and this shows that I have one key. Here it shows the curly braces with 1 in the middle. That means a 1 key that will be assigned a value. And the key is first place, second place. And then I have a list of 2 items assigned to that, which is the first name and the second name in the list. All right, let's go back to our presentation. Okay, going back to our slides, and there's a new feature called the aliases and anchors. So what is that in YAML? Using anchors will allow us to easily duplicate content across a YAML document and then use it anywhere throughout the document using references. Let's say that you have a key value, okay? And like here, the anchored content, colon, space, and then this is the value that will be referenced again. So the ones in green are the key on the left side, the value on the right-hand side. What if this value needs to be assigned or referenced or recalled multiple times in your document? Of course, you can have another key, like let's say anchored content, and then key 1 is going to have the same value. Key 10 or 20 afterwards in the document is going to have the same value. So what's a good example for that? Customer name or customer email or customer phone number. Instead of having to type that when the order was placed and when the price was mentioned and when the profile of the customer and then when the shipping address was also detailed, instead of doing all that in your program, why don't you just reference that key that you have done one time? Because it's the same value, same information, right? So the way to do it is I need after the key and the colon space of the value that I need to have referenced multiple times in my document, I'm going to add this is called the ampersand, the one in pink color, and then followed without any spaces with the anchor name. This could be John, could be Patrick, could be customer ID, customer name, F name, last name. It could be anything you want, but you need to be careful about it because this is how you are going to call it later on. And then space and the value. Then whenever you need to reference it, then you need to have the second key that will reference the value and the colon, and then space, and then an asterisk, and then you use the same name that you have used here. By doing this, this key is going to be assigned the same sentence. Let's go ahead into the YAML viewer and find out if this is what happens. Okay, here we go. Here's our YAML viewer. I'm going to paste the code that we got from the slide. And let's see. So here I don't have anything written except for the asterisk and the reference for the anchor name. Let's see what happens. So now it's telling me that this is a dictionary of 2 items, and that is true. The anchored content is the first one, the first key value, and then the use reference is the second one. The first one has the value and has the anchor. The second one has the alias, which is the asterisk, and then the name of the anchor. And that's it. However, when I look at how YAML will understand it, this is going to be interpreted as the exact same thing on here and in there. So let's verify. Let's see. Let me call this anything, ABC. And I'm going to call it by ABC as well. Okay. And let's do one thing more. Let's say this is anchor alias YAML feature. Let's see if this is how it will be understood. And tick, and there you go. The anchored content. So what if I change this and I remove the anchored completely? And I just used reference here. So just to prove that all this magic is happening because of the anchor name, and calling the anchor. So if I do this, then content and reference and the same thing, okay? So it works as described, and that is what matters, okay? Let's go back to the slide and expand on this anchor and alias feature. All right, so expanding on that, what we have learned, we can use the idea of anchors and aliases along with the merge to replicate entire objects. So if you have a mapping, a complete mapping now, not a key value pair, or a complete list, you can replicate it by referencing it elsewhere in another part of the YAML document. So here's an example that we are going to verify in the YAML viewer. I have a list that has 2 items. The first item is step 1, and that item, step 1, is a key here, or is defined by a dictionary of 3 items. So this one, when I view it on YAML viewer, I would expect curly brackets and the digit 3 within the brackets, between the brackets. So we are going to anchor now the whole thing, this whole instrument, basically all the value that will be assigned, which is the 3 items dictionary right here. I'm going to create an anchor for it with the ampersand and anything afterwards. So it could be ID 001, for example. And here, this is just a comment. It will not be processed, as we know. And then in another item list, it could be down in the document after 20 lines or 50 lines or 100 lines. I want to get all of this again, but I don't want to type it again. So what do? Then you can have in step 2, which is a list item as well, I'm going to merge. So this is the smaller than, this is the merge symbol. And then I have the colon space. So this is going to be assigned a value. And the value is the asterisk ID 001. So basically, whatever was anchored here is going to be merged right here, okay? So these 3 lines, I'd expect them to be here. However, I have another dictionary item that will override the spot size. Instead of 1 mm, it's going to make it 2 mm, okay? So we are going to redefine this key with a different value, which will override this. So would I end up with 2 spot sizes, one with 1 mm or one with 2? So basically, after I do the merge, do I end up with 4 items in the dictionary or 3? That's what we need to look and use our YAML viewer for. So here's our YAML viewer. I'm going to paste the code that we have, and let's do YAML viewer and see what happens. Let's see how that was interpreted. This is a list of 2 items, 2 list items, square brackets with the number 2. And here's the first list item, and here's the second list item. So anything in between belongs to the first item. Anything underneath this belongs to the second item because I don't have anything else underneath, okay? Then I have a step 1, and this is a key value, which is step 1. Okay, that's under the array. So this is one of the 2 items. And it has a dictionary of 3 items. Can we verify? Yes. This is the first, second, third. So this is perfect, and it is exactly as I expected it to be. Now, how about the second item? Let's look. This is step 2, and again, it's a dictionary of 3 items. However, I only had a merge on the first one and this here. So how did it end up with 3? Let's find out. So what happened is the whole thing was merged. However, the spot size here, because it's exactly the same like spot size here, it overrode, it redefined what is the value for spot size, and that's how we ended up with this. So only these 2 items, because they were not overwritten, they existed, and then the third one existed, but with a different value because I overwrote it here. All right, so it works as we described it. Let's go back to the slides. And in our case, this is going to be our anchor, and this is going to be the merge and alias part. Okay. Now, you understand YAML. Do you do the YAML viewer all the time, or the YAML editor validator online, and this is what you use for your day-to-day use? And the answer is no. There are well-known integrated development environments, or IDEs as they call it, simplified as editors. So there are 2 that are very famous, the Microsoft Visual Studio, and here's the link. You can download it and start using it. It has multiple flavors or multiple licensing, and one of them is completely free, a community one, and then you have an enterprise and another one. Check if you want to pay for that. Then we have PyCharm, very famous as well, and you can download it from this link, and it's available for Windows and Mac. We have Eclipse IDE as well. And then you have the YAML validators and YAML editors and the YAML viewers as the ones that we have looked at. The benefit of using the IDEs is if they are YAML intelligent, and these are, of course, are YAML intelligent, or if they need a plugin, then you need to just fix that plugin and you should be good to go. They will help you with the indentation. They will show you errors if you don't have the right indentation, if you're not defining the scope of the siblings or children of a parent. It's going to help you from that perspective. So you don't need to worry a lot about clicking or using the backspace all the time in order to do the indentation. It saves a lot of time and it gives you errors as well. When you write through any of these IDEs, when you write a YAML file, the YAML file can be of extension .yaml, the full four characters, or .yml. Both are perfectly fine. You don't have any issues if you use this one or that one. So either one is going to work for you without any issues. Hi, welcome back. We finished our discussion about the YAML specifics, data structures, and the advanced features and all that we have discussed. I think now we are equipped with a lot of YAML knowledge that you can apply it in any tool. There could be some delta here and there depending on the tool specifics that you can learn as you go, but now you have the foundation solid, strong to learn anything that has to do with YAML. Okay? Now let's take a quick introduction to something called APIs, the Application Programmable Interfaces. Since we use YAML to deal with technologies and tools like the ones that we have shown in here and Kubernetes as well, we need to create YAML definition or configuration files to deal with these tools, right? So the question is, who decides when creating a definition or a configuration file, whether we should use YAML, key value pairs, dictionaries, or lists for the different parameters that we need to define? Is it the DevOps engineer, the developer of the tool, or the tool itself? What do you think? What do you think is going to be the right answer? Who dictates the format and all that? Obviously, it's going to be the tool or the technology we are using, because developers who built that tool, they are expecting the input or the data structure to be in a specific format in order to be able to read the information and then act upon that, right? For example, if we take Kubernetes into the discussion, we have an API server component of the Kubernetes cluster, which is how we interact with the cluster. And this is how we ask to create, delete, modify, or get the status of different services deployed in the cluster. There is a template or syntax that is already documented on how we can do each of these tasks in Kubernetes. So users or DevOps engineers, we have to follow that syntax in order to get our tasks understood by the tool or the API server, which is going to understand it on behalf of the Kubernetes cluster. And hence, our tasks are going to be implemented as we wish or as we wanted it to. So understanding how to deal with and write the YAML is one thing, which we have already learned. But understanding the syntax the tool is expecting you to write in your configuration file is something that we learn as we learn the tool itself. And this is true for Kubernetes, for Ansible, for Docker, Prometheus, Chef, or Puppet, any one of these tools. Okay, so APIs is how applications and microservices communicate. What we have seen was one example for Kubernetes, but actually, even if we go to the very first example that we have taken at the beginning of this course, we had the Python backend and then the JavaScript front end. They wanted to talk to each other, right? And we mentioned that they need the serialization language in order to be able to communicate. But who is going to take the format from Python and translate that into JSON and the other way around? We are going to have some sort of API functionality here that is going to take care of that. So when we have something coming from Python, it's going to be translated into JSON, and then it's going to be transferred into JSON, gets on the other side, gets understood, and then through the API server will be translated into JavaScript and the other way around. So APIs are always how we hide the complexities of the code and allow the different application components to communicate. Now, the YAML and the DevOps career. You should be ready to learn a lot in the DevOps field, having all this information and knowledge about YAML that we have already understood. So enjoy the journey as you implement what you have learned in this course into what you're going to learn in the DevOps and the cloud realms. Let's now take an example of a Kubernetes definition file. We don't care about what is exactly it's going to do, but we are going to do the anatomy. We're going to analyze the file and find out the structures of YAML and whether we can find out what these are or not. Whether we can tell which children are for which parent, what are the siblings, and all that stuff. This is what we are going to focus on right now. And here is the file that we are going to analyze. So first thing, what is the YAML definition of the first line? Then this is a key that is assigned a value of v lowercase 1, and the name of the key is API v uppercase version. Okay, so that's one item, a key value pair. Now what about the second one? A key value pair where the key is kind, all lowercase, the value is pod, and the p is uppercase. Again, who states that this has to be uppercase? That is Kubernetes. Then we have a third key that is metadata. So all of these are equal from a scoping perspective. They are all siblings. And the metadata that we have is a key or an object that is assigned values, but the values are not directly assigned as a key value. They are assigned as a dictionary in our case. How many items do I have? So these are 2. So if I want to represent this, I'm going to put 2 curly brackets with digit 2 to represent the 2 items. So the first one is name, static -web. And the second one is actually another dictionary within the metadata dictionary. And this is about labels. And it has a key value, a single one, which is role, my role. Then we have a spec, which is a dictionary of one item, which is the containers. If we look at the items themselves, then we have under metadata, we have a key value that is static web. Then I have a nested dictionary, which is a child of metadata. And then we have a key value pair, which is a child of labels. And then we have containers, which is a child of spec. However, the container itself is a list of one item. All of this is the item of this list because I have only one hyphen. And it starts with the name web key value and then image nginx. And that's the software or the image basically that is going to create whatever this is going to be, to create the pod basically. I don't want to delve into Kubernetes right now. And then we have a third child under the same list item. So this is a dictionary within a list item basically. And this is ports, but ports itself, it's a key that has a value that is again a list or a dictionary under a list item. Okay. So ports is a list of one item that is a dictionary of 3 items, which are the name, containers, port, and protocol. Who decides on the P to be uppercase? That is something Kubernetes defines, that this has to be written this way. Right, so let's go to our friend, the YAML viewer, and find out how this code is going to be translated and whether it is close or far from what we have interpreted. Let's go ahead and paste the code. And I'm going to do YAML viewer and see how it looked at it. Okay, so the object has 4 siblings in a dictionary, and these are going to be the API version. They're going to be the kind, the metadata, and the spec as they are listed here. These are the 4. And if we scroll it down, then this one is a key value pair, very straightforward. Remember that the uppercase and all that is dictated by Kubernetes, whoever written the tool, because YAML is case sensitive when it is translated, if the tool is case sensitive, and obviously it is. Now we have the metadata where we have a dictionary of 2 items, and these are the name and labels, and they don't have any hyphens to the left. That's why they are not a list, they are a dictionary. And this is going to be a straight key value. The labels is a dictionary of 1 item, and that is the role, my role. Okay, so now we have gone through the first 3. What about the spec? Spec is a dictionary of 1 item, and that is the containers, which is a list of 1 item. I have here the square brackets, where here we have the curly brackets. And then it has 3 items, which they are the name, web, the image, nginx. And then I have ports, that is again a list of 1 item. And that is the name and the container and the protocol. So here, when we did this, the ports, it showed as a dictionary. So the item in the list is a dictionary of 3 items. How do I know? It is curly brackets with 3 in the middle. And these are the name, container, port, and the protocol. All right. Now you understand how you can interpret this stuff And when you go into a tool documentation, like for example, if you go to Kubernetes and then you find the curly brackets next to a specific item, you need to know that this has to be written as a dictionary. Whereas when you see the square brackets next to an item in the syntax, that means it has to be written as a list. So please keep that in mind as you go through your journey to learn DevOps tools, Kubernetes, and all the nice stuff that are expected to grow a lot of revenue over the years. You need to learn these tools, master them in order to be successful. And you do have the means now, which is understanding YAML. All right, so hopefully that was beneficial. Please visit our webpage at www.DolfinED.com to find out more cloud and DevOps courses that are going to be very beneficial to your career, whether you are transforming, starting, or a fresh graduate. And here is the link in the comments down below and on the screen as well. If you have not subscribed to the channel, please do so. Like, share, and let's meet in a subsequent video. Thank you.